Good afternoon. Thank you. Oh, thank you. My name is Nicole Devereaux. I am a rising 2L at American University, Washington College of Law in Washington, D.C. And I do want to give a special shout out to all my fellow law students who finished or survived our first year of law school. So thank you. Yesterday, I was officially approved to be one of your student representatives on our ACS National Board, so I look forward to getting to know our 200 student chapters across the country. It is my honor to introduce this afternoon's featured speaker, Matthew J. Platkin, the 62nd Attorney General of New Jersey. He was appointed by Governor Phil Murphy on February 3rd, 2022. We do consider this a little bit of a welcome home for the Attorney General because he is a longtime friend of ACS, having served as the president of his student chapter at his law school and as a leader of the ACS New Jersey lawyer chapter. So much of his work, including as the New Jersey Attorney General, reflects the values that many ACS members share. Attorney General Platkin puts public trust at the center of his work. He has made it a priority to defend civil rights, end bias and discrimination, increase transparency concerning law enforcement conduct, and hold regulated businesses and industries accountable. Attorney General Platkin prioritizes the safety of New Jersey residents by focusing on combating violent crime and implementing innovative public safety strategies. One of those strategies that I was particularly following was the innovative Arrive Together program, which changed how law enforcement responds to mental health emergencies by connecting individuals to the vital resources they need. Since his appointment, Attorney General Platkin has established several new offices within the Department of Law and Public Safety, many of which represent first-in-the-nation programming. These include the statewide Affirmative Firearms Enforcement Office, the Division of Violence Intervention and Victim Assistance, and specialized units within the Division of Criminal Justice dedicated to prosecuting human trafficking and complex financial crimes. Following the Dobbs decision, he created and has led the Reproductive Rights Strike Force, partnering with the governor's office and the legislature to protect access to reproductive health care. During the 2022 general election, Attorney General Platkin established the Voter Protection Initiative to help ensure a fair and free election and protect the fundamental right to vote. The initiative worked to ensure that New Jerseyans did not face intimidation, discrimination, or harassment when exercising their constitutional right. Attorney General Platkin holds a Bachelor of Arts from Stanford University and a Juris Doctor from Stanford Law School. He hails from Morris County, New Jersey, which explains his devotion to Bruce Springsteen and his perhaps more controversial affection for the Yankees. He lives in Montclair with his wife, Sophia, and children, Robert and Maya, and we are delighted to have him here with us this evening. Please join me in welcoming to the stage New Jersey Attorney General Matthew Platkin.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, Nicole. And I'm sorry, she just said she's a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. The Yankees are actually playing the Dodgers tonight, so we'll see who wins. Juan Soto's healthy, in case anyone was curious. Congratulations to you, and thank you for your work here on behalf of ACS. I'll touch more on my history with this great organization, but first I want to thank Senator Feingold for the introduction, or for the invitation. Senator Feingold, you were one of my heroes growing up, and the work you did on public trust and building belief in what government can do is so sorely missing. And I want to thank you for your service here in ACS as you head into your final year, and congratulate you on a remarkable tenure here. It is such an honor to be before you all. Personally, this is one of those full circle moments in my life. I was the president of the ACS chapter at Stanford Law School. It was one of the things that I enjoyed the most about my time in law school, in part because I loved fighting with the Federal Society. But I was also the president at the time when we organized the first National Student Convention, which was hosted at our law school, and I was honored to be a part of that. And I'm honored that and really proud that it's a tradition that continues to this day. And I know there are a lot of students here, and it's so important that you be involved in organizations like ACS, and I'll talk more about why. I believe then, and I believe now, that we are only as effective as we are organized. That it's not enough for us to simply be frustrated and complain about what's happening, that we must organize and we must fight back. It's also important that we're clear about what we're up against. The other side is incredibly organized. Unfortunately, they're incredibly well-funded. And so ACS plays a critical role in pushing back against an onslaught from conservative legislatures and politicians and judges who are hell-bent on destroying our democracy. I don't use that language lightly, but I genuinely believe we're living in a moment when the very foundation of our democracy is at risk. Let's start with voting rights, the topic of a distinguished panel that you're going to hear from in a few moments. 18 years ago, as the senator knows well, Congress reauthorized the coverage formula for Section 4, established by Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. The Senate vote on that legislation was 98-0, signed into law by then President George W. Bush. 98-0. That's not a tally we see too often about anything nowadays. And the law should still be in effect today, and yet just 7 years after that reauthorization, the Supreme Court struck down the formula, stating that it relied on, quote, 40-year-old facts having no logical relationship to the present day, end quote. And with that decision, the Supreme Court discarded the basic safeguards that had protected voters' rights for decades. Safeguards that Congress had just overwhelmingly reauthorized a few years earlier and which the Supreme Court did not factor into its decision. When Shelby County was decided, I was a student in Pam Carlin's, herself an ACS icon. I was a student in her voting rights class. And I remember feeling this sense of anger and rage that the Supreme Court could so cavalierly eliminate a critical safeguard for our democratic processes. A safeguard that emerged from centuries of discrimination, ultimately culminating in the civil rights movement. Of course, in the years since Shelby County, things have only gotten worse. Conservative courts and conservative legislatures operating under the guise of protecting the sanctity of the voting booth, they didn't stop. For the last decade, they've continued to undermine the rights of millions of Americans to have a say in our democracy. We've witnessed the systematic purging of voting rolls, the closing of polling centers, the push to make voting by mail harder for those who need help, the demand for voter ID laws, and those are just the start. In total, according to the Brennan Center, at least 31 states have passed 103 different voter restriction laws since Shelby County. 31 states passing 103 different laws. And in recent years, these attacks have gone to the very core of our elections and democracy itself. We've seen election denialism, something I don't think any of us thought we'd see become mainstream. And on January 6, 2021, we watched in horror as our nation's capital was overtaken by an angry mob convinced that a free and fair election had been stolen. And so now, in the wake of this years-long onslaught and the efforts to cast doubt on our elections, our democracy looks very different depending on which state you view it from. On the one hand, you have states that are gutting voter protection laws, making access to the ballot harder at every turn, harder than it's ever been since the Voting Rights Act was adopted. On the other hand, you have states like New Jersey where we have expanded access to the ballot, where we've expanded the franchise. So now, we all remember, I hope we all remember, Governor Mario Cuomo's famous speech before the 1984 Democratic National Convention 40 years ago, when he described this nation as a tale of two cities. He spoke of one city where everyone was doing well, and another city full of despair, where people slept in city streets and gave their lives to drug dealers. We live in such a nation today. Depending on which state you call home, your democracy looks drastically different. And the rights and liberties you are afforded as a resident of this country look different too. In fact, we can't discuss the state of our democracy without confronting the reality that millions of Americans wake up to every single day, living in constant fear thanks to the steady erosions of rights by conservative courts and legislators and governors, attorneys general across this country. That's not what our Constitution demands. The Constitution doesn't only apply to some states in the United States. The 15th Amendment doesn't prohibit denying citizens the right to vote on the basis of race in only some states. The 19th Amendment didn't give women the right to vote in only some states. The 24th Amendment didn't eliminate poll taxes in only some states. The 26th Amendment did not lower the voting age to 18 in only some states. These protections apply to every citizen of every state in the United States of America. Now, as a state official, I have to say I certainly understand the point of federalism, but when it comes to voting rights and when it comes to basic human liberties in this country, America's not supposed to be a tale of two cities. Voting rights, though, is sadly not the only example of basic rights differing wildly depending on which city you live and growing further and further apart, seemingly by the day. Let's talk about reproductive rights. As a nation, we're well aware of the Supreme Court's unprecedented decision in Dobbs, for the first time revoking a fundamental right. But if you live in states like New Jersey, where, as has been mentioned, we have protected and expanded access to abortion and other reproductive health care since Dobbs, frankly, I think we're numb to the devastation that that decision has wrought. In states like Georgia and Texas, where I started my career and where I, along with a number of my AG colleagues, just visited a few weeks ago, there's a growing humanitarian crisis. At a reproductive health care center in Austin, I heard these stories firsthand. One woman described laying on the delivery table after she delivered her baby, nearly bleeding to death. Her placenta didn't deliver, and the doctor would not give her a DNC because he was afraid of getting charged with a first-degree crime. Only after she went into septic shock did they provide her the life-saving treatment that she needed. OBGYN access in South Texas is basically non-existent, meaning for women in the border region, the southern part of the state, frankly throughout the state, and particularly for immigrant women and women of color, life-saving treatment is unavailable. These horrors are happening right here in the United States of America, the richest country the world has ever seen. So it's a tale of two cities for women in this country. And it's a tale of two cities for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. In many states, including right here in Georgia, trans youth are now the political punching bag du jour for conservative politicians. That's right, they're targeting some of the most vulnerable kids amongst us. Kids who attempt suicide at rates as high as 50%. Kids who are too often homeless and desperate simply because of who they are. States like Georgia and Texas passed laws restricting health care access for trans youth, banning preferred pronouns, forcing them to be outed against their wills. Well, they tried the same thing in school districts in New Jersey. And guess what? We sued them every time a school district tried to out their kids against their will. We won an injunction in every single case. So it's a tale of two cities for trans kids in this country, but frankly, it's a tale of two cities for all kids in this country. We now live in a country, and this should shock all of us, where the single leading cause of death for children is a firearm. Not a fatal disease, not getting in a car accident, not falling into a pool. It's a gun. A uniquely American horror show, and one that's made worse by the state and the breakdown of our democracy. And yet, thanks to the Supreme Court and the NRA's control of Congress, we live in a country that accepts a patchwork of state laws and approaches to the most dangerous product in our marketplace. Some states, like New Jersey, have strengthened our gun laws in ways entirely consistent with the Second Amendment, even since Bruin. We've held gun companies accountable for breaking our laws. We've invested in community-based solutions to gun violence. And as a result, last year, New Jersey had our lowest level of gun violence on record since we've been tracking it. But here's the bad news. In other states, they've taken a laissez-faire approach to the gun violence epidemic, believing that somehow, if we just allow more guns in the marketplace, the problem will solve itself, an approach no other country in the world takes. And as a result, we live in a country where our kids are more likely to die by firearm simply because they live in Mississippi rather than New Jersey. And I didn't pick those two states at random because the numbers don't lie. You are six times more likely to be shot and killed in the state of Mississippi than you are in New Jersey. Now, I don't think people in Mississippi are any more violent inherently than the people in New Jersey. It's the laws they have, it's the way they enforce them, and it's what we're causing for our kids throughout this country. And we tolerate this because our democracy has broken down to the point where we accept this as normal. So now you can see that your fate in America deeply depends upon which state you happen to live in. Because of our fraying democracy, your voting rights, your reproductive rights, your right to identify as your true and authentic self, your right to go to school or a movie theater or a church or a playground or a park or a zoo and not die is dependent in large part based on which state you happen to live in. And that's wrong. That's not how basic rights are supposed to work. So that should offend all of us, even those of us who happen to live in states like New Jersey where things are better. So what do we do about all this? Do we throw up our hands and give up? Do we conclude in the face of all this that maybe things can't change? Maybe it's too difficult. Maybe the Supreme Court makes things too hard and Congress is too intractable and the media is too fragmented and our country maybe is just simply too divided. I suppose it's easy to fall victim to cynicism in the face of the tales of two cities that we see every day. But I also suspect you didn't fly to Atlanta to congregate amongst an incredible collection of progressive lawyers just to experience the Georgia humidity. Remember what Charles Hamilton Houston said. A lawyer is either a social engineer or he's a parasite on society. You came here because you are social engineers, because you want to be part of the solution, because you're progressive warriors, because you believe in an America that has never lived up to its promise, but one day, it can. So what do? Well, first, we fight. We have to fight in states like Georgia, and I'm proud that ACS is doing the convention right here in Georgia. We have to push back against policies that target women and trans kids and immigrants and people of color. And we need to fight for common sense gun safety laws and defend them in court. And by the way, despite the NRA saying they were going to strike down every single one of New Jersey's gun safety laws, post-Bruin, I'm proud to say that they are all still on the books and not for lack of trying on their part. But we also have to fight in an organized manner. We can't go about it on our own and expect to be effective. That's why ACS is so critical. So we need to fight for the issues we care about, and that's obvious. But we will never truly fix our democracy until we restore people's faith in it. Because while you may not have fallen victim to cynicism and despair, these feelings are all too pervasive today. We all routinely see the polling that shows that trust in government and governmental institutions is at an all-time low. A recent Pew poll found that fewer than 2 in 10 people trust their government in Washington to do what's right. And that level of distrust is pervasive at every level of government. Why is that? Why does the public tolerate an assault on voting rights? Why does the public tolerate an American democracy that has become a tale of two cities? Why has cynicism taken hold of this nation? I'll give you one word: corruption. That's not just my opinion. The New York Times recently ran a poll asking Americans what they viewed the single greatest threat to American democracy to be. The answer was not Russia or China or white nationalism or election denialism or domestic terrorism or any other threat that might come to mind. It was corruption. It's ordinary, everyday corruption. The kind of corruption that eats at the social compact between government and those we serve. The kind that make people lose faith because they feel that the wealthy and the well-connected play by a different set of rules. So in order for us to restore our democracy, yes, we must protect our vulnerable, and yes, we must fight like hell for voting rights. But we also cannot be afraid to hold those accountable who undermine our system of government, regardless of who they are and how powerful they may be. And we also can't pick and choose when we care about this. It's not okay to turn a blind eye to corruption when we are talking about people on our side of the issues. This is not an issue that we can sometimes be good at. So as the other side tears down walls between institutions that are meant to be independent, we need to build them up. We need to embrace strong and independent leaders, including in offices of attorneys general like mine. People who are willing to hold power to account and uphold institutional norms in our democracy and the rule of law, even when doing so is unpopular. And I know a thing or two about this. Earlier this year, we saw a consequential litigation over how my state designs and structures its ballots. As the plaintiffs in that case showed, New Jersey's law had been designing its ballots in such a way that gave a decisive and nearly unbeatable advantage to candidates who were endorsed by one of their county political party organizations. The advantage was something that in New Jersey was known as the county line, and journalists often explained that it was the driving force behind machine politics in our state. The county line was awarded in many instances by a single unelected county political chairman, and I do say chairman, and the evidence showed very often that whoever received the county line would be the Democratic or Republican nominee for a particular office. New Jersey was the only state in the nation to have a system like this. And while attorney generals traditionally defend the laws of their state, after closely reviewing the evidence, I announced that I would not be defending the law as I had concluded it was unconstitutional. And I want to give Solicitor General Jeremy Feigenbaum a shout out, who worked closely with me. You might not want people to know that, but back home. I explained in our letter that while attorneys general do usually have a duty to defend laws, and I take that responsibility very seriously, the rules are simply different when those laws undermine voting rights, including the people's right to have a fair ballot. Now, this was not a popular decision amongst many in the New Jersey political establishment. Probably lost me a few friends. But I believe that the evidence of the law's invalidity was overwhelming, and that defending it would further undermine trust in government and our democracy. And I'll tell you, I've never felt prouder than in doing the work that I did that day, because I knew what we were doing was right. And exercising that moral courage in my own way, I was contributing to rebuilding faith in our democracy. I simply never have, and suspect I never will, regret exercising my own moral courage if it means standing up for our democracy. And my decision was vindicated. Both the district court and the Third Circuit unanimously agreed with me, and 3 days ago, for the first time in New Jersey history, voters across the state could vote on ballots that did not privilege candidates, but gave everyone an equal shot, regardless of whether they had their party's boss's endorsement or not. And so to those of you who are just beginning your careers in the law, I hope you take this same path. And I encourage you to join the fight to save our democracy. In 1967, Senator Bobby Kennedy visited the Mississippi Delta, where he witnessed poverty the likes of which he had never seen. Now, this was a man who had seen deep poverty across this country and around the world, but he could not shake the images of little boys and girls with swollen bellies and sores up and down their arms. He couldn't stomach that this was happening in the United States of America. He returned that evening to his opulent home and went around his dinner table with his large family. He looked at his happy and healthy kids, and he pounded the table. And he looked them in the eye and said, "Do you have any idea how lucky you are? Do something for our country." Well, hate to break it to you, but you guys are the lucky ones, whether you know it or not. You're here amongst progressive leaders and legal luminaries. You have the training to give voice to the voiceless and to hold power accountable. Deep down, I know you have the moral courage to make change a reality. And you're living in a moment not unlike 1967, when our democracy is in great peril. You are the lucky ones. Do not despair. Defend our democracy. Join the fight. Stay organized and do something for our country. Thank you.